chance. They were born in bloody circumstance. To go, leave me, run like you've never run before. A voice from the underground, given room to breathe, not be drowned. So die if you get the chance. Better men than you've been, let this dance. To go, leave me, run like you've never run before. I have seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me away. To go, leave me, run like you never did. No, believe me, run like you've never run before.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Podcast, brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. If you are watching us live, you'll be watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. We broadcast live most Wednesday/Thursday evenings about 8:30. If you go to one of our various social media channels, you can normally find out on there when we plan to put one of these out. But don't worry, if you miss the live broadcast, you can watch back later, or you can download an audio version on any of your podcast apps like Apple Podcasts. I nearly said iTunes. I don't think iTunes is a thing anymore. I'm old. I can't keep up with all the different words. We're on Spotify as well, and other podcast apps. Joining me this evening, we have George in front row, John Anderson. Good evening, John.
Anderson Ishvili, I think your friend's my new name. Yes, good, pleasure to be here as always. Cammy, how are you?
So I'm very well, John. John rocking the Georgian Rugby World Cup top tonight, as well as the beard and shiny head combo.
I'm basically fully qualified for Georgia now. Yeah,
that's it. Also joining us this evening, we have Johnny McGinty. Good evening, Johnny.
Hello, how are we doing? I'm still glitching at the moment today.
That's fine. Johnny's internet will catch up with us probably around the end of the podcast, where we all say goodbye. We've got a packed podcast for us. Yeah, there we go. See, case in point. So we've got a packed podcast tonight. We've got lots to get through, lots of news. But first of all, we want to we earlier this week, or indeed yesterday, I spoke to Scaife about their initiative Rugby for Peace, which they run in Colombia. A very interesting film that they've put out. So we're going to play that interview for you now, and I'm hoping this works. So bear with us, folks. We'll play that interview for you now with Mark and James from Scaife. Hello, everybody. I'm joined by Mark Camburn and James Cave to talk a little bit about their documentary Rugby for Peace. But first, because when we have guests on the podcast, we always have a standard question we like to open with. Mark, I'm going to start with you. What club socks would you wear if you were selected for the Barbarians?
Hi, Cammy. Thanks very much. So for me, I'd have to go for two socks if I ever got that opportunity. I would have my North Berwick Rugby Club socks, and then on the other leg, I would go for my Santa Cruz Rugby Club, which was my club for 12 odd years when I played in Bolivia. That would be my other socks that I'd have to wear.
Very exotic socks, Mark. What about you, James?
Well, I mean, as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm from the north of England, so I'll be wearing some socks from down in Lancashire, probably for Fylde Rugby Club, which is the local club just near where I grew up. So just the one sock for me.
Very good. All right. I think we'd allow you two of the same, James. I think wouldn't be so cruel. Guys, you've kind of produced this film, Rugby for Peace. Mark, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the film and the project and how that came about?
Yeah, so a few years ago, actually, when I was still based out in Bolivia but working for SCIAF, we started thinking about how we could use, if there's any way we could kind of cross over between rugby and the kind of peace building and development work that I do at SCIAF. And so started investigating like kind of if there was any kind of Rugby for Peace or Rugby for Development type work that already existed, and came across some existing initiatives in Colombia, which is where we were already working, which just seemed a bit too good to be true. So got in touch with the guys in Colombia from an organization called Fundación Buen Punto, and started chatting to them and to see if there's any way that SCIAF could support them to further develop their work with rugby and peace building in Colombia, because they worked in the same region of Colombia where we already had peace building work ongoing. So that's so it came about really kind of me bringing together my passion for rugby and my work and trying to see if we could find like a kind of nexus in the middle of that. SCIAF was very supportive of the idea. We managed to start with a small pilot project, a sort of 1 year project to kind of see how that would go, and it kind of just went from strength to strength from that kind of start. And then in terms of the film, I started chatting to James and some other of her kind of colleagues in SCIAF about the project, and obviously it's very different to the work that we usually do in SCIAF. And James got very excited by it and thought, well, we need to get some of this on camera and see what it looks like. I think initially we thought about doing like just a wee kind of, I don't know, 5-minute feature on it, but it grew legs and arms and became this big feature film that we've now produced.
And James, for you as the filmmaker, kind of how did that evolve for you? Was it kind of, as Mark said, a kind of quick 5-minute piece, but what was it when you got in to start filming that it kind of became that there was more of a story there to tell, or was it the initial idea kind of planted a seed?
Well, yeah, I mean, I joined SCIAF now about 2.5 years ago, and it was sort of the tail end of the lockdown when I arrived, and I was obviously getting to know the organisation, and this rugby project just really stood out as something that was incredibly innovative, but also just really kind of inspiring the thought of kids on the beach playing rugby, and so, like Mark says, we initially thought, well, let's go and just see if we can grab enough material for a short 5-minute documentary. And so we engaged some local filmmakers in and around Choco to go and visit the project. And they were there for about a week in length. And when they got back in touch, they sent, like hours and hours and hours of footage. And it was just amazing. It was so beautifully shot. The interviews were really powerful and sort of covered a whole range of, obviously some of the challenges that people face every day with the armed conflict around them, the effects of the pandemic, and also living on the front line of the climate crisis. But also there was so much hope. There was such a sort of a wonderful rounded view of the communities there, the strength of the communities, and also the love for this new game that they'd not experienced before. As Mark will probably tell you later, in that part of Colombia, rugby is not massively well played. So this new ball, this new game was very exciting. And also particularly interesting for me is that we've been working with indigenous communities in Colombia. So to be able to go and take rugby to those places, it just felt like this is an amazing opportunity to tell these stories. And so I kind of got into the content, and after producing a 5-minute film, I was like, there's too much good stuff here, and it kept building and building and growing arms and legs, and the documentary eventually emerged about 6 months later. But with the support of lots of people, both over in Colombia, the partners who helped, with the filming, but also some local musicians here in Scotland, some local designers, and I think the product that came out at the end, I think, gives a really lovely, rounded view of life over there.
And Mark, it's an interesting kind of choice, Colombia. I think until I'd kind of read up about the film and the thinking behind it, I think I had quite appreciated kind of the conflict that had gone on in Colombia for 50 years, and with the peace accords only being signed in 2016, I think most people's experience maybe in the UK and in other countries is of, you think of Colombia, you think of the kind of American 80s and 90s films about the FBI and DEA agents going in and dealing with kind of drugs, and then that conflict isn't something that was particularly well known about. So I suppose what was the reason in going into Colombia in particular? Was it the kind of after effects of that conflict?
Yeah, so actually, Cammy, the conflict in Colombia is ongoing. So it's been going on for over 60 years now. There was a peace accord signed back in 2016 with one of the guerrilla groups, with the FARC, which is the largest guerrilla group, but there are other armed groups in Colombia still operating. So you have a group called the ELN, which is another large guerrilla group, still active and currently in peace negotiations with the government. And you have paramilitary groups as well, and you have all sorts of things linked into the drugs trade, into arms trafficking, and illegal mining that kind of keeps fueling the conflict, and it's particularly prevalent in rural areas in Colombia. So we've been working in Colombia since the 1980s, and peace has been a main focus of our work in Colombia since then. And so we've been working in this region in Chocó, in this part of Colombia. We've been working there since 2006, working on peace building, working with local leaders, with local communities affected by conflict, working on their kind of right to access land, the right to define how their land's used, their ability to stand up and speak out without feeling under threat. So peace building is a real kind of central focus of our work in Colombia and in that region. And so when this kind of idea came about that we might be able to work with a slightly different focus to peace building, bring in sport, and seeing how sport can be used to kind of work on peace building and work on those same kind of peace building ideas and values, but maybe with a younger age group, and kind of trying to get those ideas in from a very young age through a kind of something that's quite fun and new and innovative for people there. It just seemed like a perfect fit to kind of start doing this in this work in Colombia.
And what's the reception to rugby in particular? Because I know in like Uruguay and Argentina and other parts of South America, it's traditionally been a very kind of linked to private schools and maybe kind of the richer elements of society. So how is that been received? Is it the fact that it's just not known at all, that there is no kind of prejudice that comes with it, or has that been challenging?
I mean, rugby has a certain history in Colombia, but more in kind of Bogota and Medellin and the kind of bigger urban areas. I would say Colombia is probably one of the fastest growing rugby countries at the moment in South America. It's really, really developing fast. But in the Chocó region, there was no rugby. It's the only part of Colombia where until the sort of project came on, there was no rugby in that department in Colombia. So for everyone there, it's a completely new sport. Never heard of it, never played it, don't know what it's about. So in that sense, they're completely open to kind of just getting involved, and that there's no prejudice, there's no baggage that comes with it. And that's one of the advantages of using rugby in this area, because we could use another sport like football, for example. And in fact, the methodology we use comes out of a methodology called Football for Peace. And so we could have gone in with football, but football is a sport that everyone knows there, and everyone already has all their kind of baggage in terms of which club they support, and those kind of, as you know, those kind of rivalries that kind of build out of that. So going in with a sport that's new to everyone, you kind of gets rid of all those existing rivalries that might exist.
Yeah, and James, I suppose one of the things that I think, particularly with rugby fans, there's a lot more awareness now of South American rugby. I think traditionally, kind of, that there's been Argentina and Uruguay, but more recently we've seen kind of Chile coming through and getting very exciting. So is that, as a filmmaker, I suppose, and going to making this film, is that an exciting opportunity to kind of talk about this emerging, this fast-growing sport and the impact it can have on communities? Was that an exciting part of the filmmaking process?
Well, I think a bit like I said earlier, I suppose that because it was quite new for a lot of the communities, that was really exciting to kind of capture their initial reactions to this new sport that had come to their communities, and how it was bringing disparate parts of the whole region together. So I suppose I can probably only comment on that side of things in terms of how rugby has helped that region. But I suppose as the wider perspective, Mark once played for the Bolivian rugby team, so he's probably got a better angle on the region in general.
Yeah, I suppose residency works two ways, Mark, I guess.
Yeah, does indeed. But yeah, I was actually going to add on to that from what James was saying, that the kind of the fast-growing part of rugby in Colombia is also women's rugby, and been really developing. And I don't know if you remember back to last year, Cammy, the Scottish women's team actually played Colombia in the final playoff to get to the World Cup. So you can really see how much rugby is growing in Colombia, that they were like one step away from getting to the Women's World Cup. But that's something that we kind of want to tap into. So the project is really trying to focus on getting as many girls involved as possible. So originally we'd set quite low targets in terms of, because we weren't sure what would be possible in terms of getting girls involved. But as there's no baggage with the sport, everyone just sees it as like a new sport for everybody to get involved in. So we're getting very close to 50-50 participation, girls and boys, and that we see that as a really positive angle. And we have been working with the Colombian Rugby Federation, so they're obviously aware of the project, aware of the film. They really enjoyed the film, and they're really keen on that angle as well, of how we can kind of push girls' involvement and women's involvement in the rugby.
And I suppose as well, a great thing as well, just to add quickly to that, is the project is obviously free for any of the participants to go and join in. And we follow the story of one girl in an Indigenous community who had been part of a football club through her school previously, but suddenly the costs for kit and for equipment had meant that she couldn't continue doing that. But Rugby For Peace coming in meant that, you know, she could start playing sport again, and the balls were provided and the training kits were provided through the SCIAF project. So the barriers are really low, and not just women and girls as well, people with disabilities joined in as well with the project. So it's a really sort of it's a great sort of community project, because you've got people of all ages as well, you know, young children up to sort of young adults. So that's a huge benefit, I think, of the work.
And in terms of we've kind of covered the history of rugby in this country on this podcast before, and I think when one of the reasons rugby took off, particularly in kind of Scotland and England, is there were very similar kind of pastimes. You know, ball games where you'd have whole towns kind of going and passing the ball around between shops and in high streets. Was there anything kind of similar to rugby that you could kind of point at, or is this like a completely new concept, Mark, altogether to them?
I think in that region it's completely new. I don't think there's. I know, like, we've been invited into Indigenous communities and they have their own Indigenous games, but I don't think there's any kind of real similarity between those kind of Indigenous games and rugby. But obviously, like, yeah, team sports is I mean, footballs are really, really important in Colombia, and so every village you go to in Colombia, there'll be a football pitch of, you know, to some degree of construction, you know, just like a few posts in the grass, but there'll always be a village football pitch, and so they have that kind of team sport and competing aspect, but not sports similar to rugby. I don't think there is really a Colombian sport that you could compare to rugby.
And what's been the reception of going into kind of the Indigenous communities? Has it been kind of easy to win them over with being kind of a sport initiative, or have there been challenges?
Yeah, so I thought that would be really challenging, and I think we talk about this a bit in the film, that we thought it was going to be really challenging to get into Indigenous communities. They are quite they kind of keep themselves to themselves. It's not always easy to gain access. You have to ask for permission before you go and work in an Indigenous community. They kind of allow you to come in. They can often be quite isolated from other communities, so it's not easy to reach them. So I wasn't sure whether we'd get into Indigenous communities where it would be able to work there or not, but they've proved to be really, really open to it. I think the team on the ground in Colombia have been very good at kind of speaking to their leaders, kind of going through the right channels, so that the pathways are open for them to come in, and then I've just shown how inclusive the sport is, how they're getting everyone involved, how it's free to participate in as well. And so they've been really, really open to it. Fortunately, we've had a few challenges since the film went out with some of the Indigenous communities, but it's around the security situation. So because of the isolation of some of the communities, you often have some of the armed groups operating in the regions around where the communities are. So we had a situation last year where we had to stop some of the activities in some of the communities because there was armed activities going on in those areas, and it wasn't safe for people to come in. And it was the communities themselves that got in touch with our staff on the ground and said, it's not safe just now to come in. We have to stop activities for just now. So we're working to see how we can overcome those issues, because obviously those are the communities where we want to be working, because they're obviously where they have the real issues with conflict. But we have to look after the safety of the staff who are delivering the project.
And are you able to kind of work with the groups operating in the area, or is that something you have to just completely step back from? Are you able to kind of go in there and explain what you do? I guess be a distrust not just of kind of sport, but maybe kind of cameras going into an area as well.
Yeah, we have to be completely neutral, so not take any sides, and we have to be very transparent in terms of what we're doing. So making sure that the leaders within the community, and therefore potentially people who are listening and watching, who are linked to the armed groups, are aware of what we're doing and what the project is, and see that it's not a threat to anybody, that it's coming in to work with the children and young people in the community. But yeah, it's just a case of being very open, very transparent. As of working directly with the armed groups, we wouldn't do that.
Yeah. And James, how can people get involved? How can people kind of find the film?
Yeah, so lots of ways to get involved. Obviously, to watch the film, if you head over to the SCIAF website, so sciaf.org.uk/Rugby for Peace, and the film has now gone publicly available, so you can watch it there from the website. Obviously, if that inspires you to continue supporting the work that we're doing over in Colombia, there's a donation page at sciaf.org.uk/rugby, and so any contribution there will help obviously continue with staffing costs, with rugby kit, with rugby balls, and obviously making sure that we can continue to reach these remote communities. And then obviously with Christmas approaching, we have also brought out a series of ethical gifts for Christmas time, and you can buy the gift of rugby initiatives, which again is a nice way of sort of keeping rugby in mind at Christmas time. So I hope people enjoy the film, and do please get in touch with SCIAF if you've enjoyed it, and if you'd be interested in showing the film as well, maybe at your rugby club or any group that you're involved with. If you drop an email to get involved at sciaf.org.uk, our community team can help with preparing a wee screening. We just want people to watch it and enjoy it.
Fantastic. We'll make sure all those links are on the website, scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, as well, so people can get access to them. Mark, are there plans to kind of expand this to other countries then after this?
Yeah, that's our kind of long-term goal is to do that. I think at this stage, what we want to do is grow it more in Colombia. So we've just started a new 3-year project with our local partner, Fundación Buen Punto, who I should have said they're all ex-rugby players who run this organization. So they're ex-Colombian rugby players who are helping us run this project in Colombia. So our plan with them is to try and grow the project in Colombia first, and then we'd look to take it to other countries as well. SCIAF works in 8 countries across the world. A number of them are affected by conflict, so we'd really like to grow the project to some of those other countries where we work. So maybe DRC, South Sudan, Ethiopia, countries that have had a history of conflict, a recent history of conflict. But it's really important for us that we find the right local partners to run the project through, because SCIAF doesn't have any SCIAF staff on the ground in any of these countries. We only work through local organisations. So we would need to find the right organisations who we could work with to be able to then run these type of projects. Important also to mention that it doesn't have to be rugby. Obviously, rugby is our hook just now, but it could be other sports as well. The methodology can be applied, as I've said, to football and to other sports. So that might be a way into other countries as well. They might be able to do it with different sports.
So maybe there'll be like a Hockey for Peace sequel. Who knows?
Yeah.
I know. I was going to say, I don't think that maybe not quite the climate for curling for peace.
Not where we work.
No, it might be kind of limits on how far we can push some Scottish sports. Well, listen, Mark and James, thank you very much for joining us. It's been really interesting. As we said, we'll make sure all the links to the film and to SCIAF are all on the blog. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Cam. I really appreciate your support. And yeah, please do get in touch with us if anyone wants more information about the film or would like to do a screening. We'd be delighted to come and share the film with you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. So that's Rugby for Peace. If you want to know more, if you go to the blog, scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, find the link for this podcast. We've got all the links to the film. You can watch the film on there. You get in touch with the guys, and there's a link to the shop as well. There'll be a link to the shop as well, where you can buy the gift of rugby for Christmas. But remember, like a puppy, rugby is not just for Christmas. or just the Six Nations or the Autumn Test. It is for life as well. But yeah, a really, really interesting initiative, really interesting film as well, that you can watch for free. And as they said there, if you have a rugby club or a social club or anything, then you want to show the film there and make a bit of a night of it, spread the word, then get in touch and they'll happily come along and run that for you. One of the things they touched upon there, and here's how we're going to seamlessly link in the next bit, was
Just professional, this.
I know. The growth of women's rugby in Colombia, much like the growth of women's rugby in Scotland. Oof, did you see? Can't see the
So
joins with that at
smooth.
all. I know. So big news this week in Scotland. We now have, I'm not going to say 2 pro teams because they're not, but baby steps, everyone. We have 2 teams, women's teams, that are now aligned to Glasgow Warriors and Edinburgh. Johnny, it feels like a step in the right direction. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of positives. Let's talk about the positives first, and then we can get on to it.
Yeah, and I think it's an expansion of the Celtic League competition. I can't remember if that's how they worded the name, which I think is definitely the sort of thing that we're wanting to do. The URC, when it was rebranded, made a lot of noise about wanting to have a women's competition running alongside the men's. So we're kind of headed towards that now with 2 Scottish, 2 Irish, 2 Welsh teams. It certainly seems like it's lining up the way that it's been talked about. So, like you say, it's the start. We'll have to see if it keeps going.
I think, John, in terms of the way it's been set up, I think Scotland, I think, are a bit of ahead of the game here, because it's Irish and Welsh teams going into it, but because the 2 Scotland teams are aligned to the clubs. That means, for example, as Glasgow have announced and CubeNet have announced, they're able to they've got the sponsors on board to come and sponsor the women's team. You've got an identified branding already. The both sets of players are going to play in the club strips. So there is an established structure. There's established resources in place. You've got easy access to they're already talking about, I think the first double header is going to be held ahead of the 1872 in the Hive. So you can watch the women's game in the Hive, then cross the road and go to Murrayfield and sit, sit miles away from anybody else in Murrayfield. But that to me is a massive step ahead to what the Welsh and the Irish teams have done, which is to set up completely new teams. So Scotland are already ahead, I think, with the way they're setting this up.
Yeah, absolutely. And whisper it, is this the benefit of having two pro clubs and not having 4? I'm obviously being flippant with that, but no, I think it is really good, and I think that's the excitement levels automatically generates there's a bit of a, let's say, ownership that comes with that supporters already feel more engaged in, because best will in the world trying to generate interest in a Leinster, what was it, Leinster Ulster hybrid called the Wolf Pack or Wolf Hounds or whatever they're called. It doesn't quite work as well, I think. So I think Scotland do have an advantage in that sense. The problem you do have is a lot of our players, obviously a lot of the Scottish players, because of the way the structure's been organised for so many years, we do have a lot of players who don't play in Scotland and who are obviously elsewhere. So, it's a great opportunity for further growth, and I'm sure both pro clubs' media managers will be all over this when the time comes.
I think that's interesting. There's a photo, Johnny, that Alice Martin posted on her Instagram earlier this week of Leicester Tigers and Loughborough, I think, played this weekend.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
and it was the sheer number of Scottish internationals.
Yeah.
They had a group photo of them at the end, and
it was easy a dozen of them, I think.
Yeah, and that's not. You look right across the Prem 15s, and it's not just Leicester and Loughborough. We have, it feels almost like English top flight football in the 70s and early 80s now.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the big challenges for this moving forward is how they sort of reconcile that and what they're going to do about that. Because if it's going to continue to expand in this Celtic League, whether that becomes like a mirror URC with South African teams or whether it stays as the Celtic League, that's clearly the main focus of the SRU at the moment. I would imagine they want to be competitive in that. So to that end, are they going to start bringing back internationals and paying them to play for these Scottish teams, or are we leaving them being paid for by somebody else and we're using this as a bit more of a development? In which case, again, with the best will in the world, that's a difficult thing even for existing Glasgow and Edinburgh fans to get behind. If you're saying we've got this Glasgow women's team or this Edinburgh women's team, but we're not going to pay for any contracts to get any of our international players, it's harder to root for, and it doesn't give you that opportunity to see your international stars week in, week out. So I think they kind of have to decide what the plan is and how they're going to overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the names as well. It was the Wolfhounds and Clovers.
The Clovers, yeah.
For the Irish name, Clovers is a terrible name.
Oh, it's
awful.
Absolutely horrendous.
Wolfhounds, I'm on with. Then you've got Brighton Thunder and Qualier Lightning. I don't know how you say. How do you make the G and the W sound?
Absolutely no idea, but I can tell you that Rhiannon Garth Jones will be shouting at her headphones right now, telling you exactly how you make this.
Let's find numerous ways to mispronounce this. Qualier Lightning. Gwillia. Let's call it Gwillia. Gwillia Lightning.
Let's call it Jeff Lightning.
They sound both the Welsh names I said sound like second-rate Game of Thrones characters earlier in the week.
Or
which went down really well with all our Welsh friends. That was you'd imagine.
Yeah. It did, yeah. Characters in Cars, the Cars franchise,
and then the two. And if you look at the way that they've branded the Welsh teams, all they've done is they've obviously contracted the Glasgow Warriors logo designer and just said, we want this but in different colours. Because it's just the Glasgow. But Craig, we're talking about the new women's teams aligned to Glasgow and Edinburgh. We've moved on to the Welsh and the Irish teams. We were just kind of covering how Scotland are a step ahead because their teams are aligned to existing teams, so that gives us a step ahead. But there must be some investment definitely in Wales because they've managed to spend some money on branding.
Oh, there's bound to be, isn't there?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Have they got enough players? Oh, no, actually, you probably find that the women's side of things, they've got enough players to scrummage against each other, etc.
That's where we end up in Welsh rugby is the Qualia Lightning scrummaging against the Dragons' first choice scrum. But Craig, I mean, how exciting is this for you? This announcement? We've got two, not pro teams. We'll come on to that in a moment. We're doing the positives first. We've got two teams aligned to the pro teams.
Yeah, it's for me. It's exciting for me because we're getting hopefully two pro teams or two aligned pro teams who eventually will become pro teams. Hopefully, it's advancing sort of the top end of women's rugby so that we have the knock-on effect that more women and girls will get the chance to play rugby and see rugby and hopefully then align themselves to a team, or I was going to say professional team, but you understand what I mean. The only issue we have is how is that going to affect the Premiership teams, and that's my concern. And I certainly I've had a couple of people message me on X or Twitter, if you want to call it, to say that they're concerned about the women's teams, that the Premiership and National One teams or whatever they're called now. So it's difficult, but I'm just one of those people that anything that can be aligned to get parity with the men's side of thing for the women's teams is a good thing. So also from what I know with some of the players, they're looking for higher level rugby because a lot of the difference between age group and Thistles, and also not just age group but also club rugby and the Thistles was a massive step up. So they're looking for that massive step up.
I think the one thing that is at the minute, I think Doug Struth has said, John, that let's see where this goes. It may end up in semi-professional rugby. I think it's kind of disappointing that that's the aspiration, and that the aspiration isn't now this will become. We'll end up with 2 pro teams here. We will end up with 2 professional women's team. But this is the path we're on to deliver that. What we're getting is, I mean, Al Kellock's statement pretty much put the SRU at the very bottom of the list of people he thanked for setting this up. So, just classic Al Kellock. But I think it's this. I think this is great. It's fantastic. I think it's great. It's aligned to the thing. I think the disappointing thing is there is no kind of pathway, not pathway for players, but pathway for the SRU to say, right, our aspirations in 3 years, we will have 2 fully professional women's squads aligned to Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That it is definitely the most disappointing bit of it, and best we know the SRU are normally quite. I'm not going to say good. They're quite good at saying nothing, right? And in this instance, it would have been in their interests to say nothing, to go, yeah. So they're aligned to these clubs and almost let the fans fill in the blanks in their heads and go, well, if they're playing for Glasgow Warriors of Edinburgh, then they're definitely going to be professional at some point, 100%, and just let the fans do the work for them. But instead they've almost, it's been like, okay, so here's some good news for you, but we don't want you getting carried away with this. No, because really, we know this isn't going to work, and it just smacks of that typical attitude to women's rugby that the SRU have shown a lot through this process, and it's not very good. It's like, how do you manage to get this wrong yet again when it is right? It's just. I
suppose the worry for me, Craig, is that we're back where men's rugby was kind of at the turn of professionalism, and I'm not expecting somebody to shake a magic money tree, or in the SRU got back garden and get a load of money to start paying people. But at the same time, we know that paying players means they can focus solely on their rugby and developing as players and playing for those teams and making those teams a success. And the risk is that if there isn't a plan to get them from where we are now to fully professionals, we get left behind. We're already way behind France and England, but there's a chance here that we, all of a sudden Ireland take some of the men in charge of Irish rugby taking interest in this. Wales are already kind of, have already kind of cleared the dead wood in their organisation to get this moving ahead. There is a risk that if there isn't a plan, we get left behind.
Yeah. Well, first things first. From what I've been told and I've heard, Ireland's side of things is an absolute bin fire at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see how that all comes together. I will be very interested to see how that comes together. But the problem you have is it's almost like these 2 teams are going to be developing our future players who will then go on to play for professional teams in England. Or France at the moment. And I think you're still going to have that. So you're then going to have this situation where we're looking for more women and girls playing rugby, more women and girls playing high level rugby. Are these 2 teams going to give that to them? And that's the big question. And if they're going to get it, and they get a high level of rugby, then they're going to have to start paying them. The problem you have is that it's not really a league yet. Once they have a league, and hopefully this is a lead on to a URC version, so you're going to have Ireland, Wales, and ourselves, and fingers crossed, hopefully Italy as well, all coming into a URC style league. Then you're going to hopefully you're going to get professional money. But I think it's a fair bit away yet. I think this is just the start. They're dipping their toes, no matter how good or bad that's going to be. They're dipping their toes.
Yeah, but we let's it's a positive move. Let's say they've done something. I think the choice to line, as I said, the choice to line it with the two existing teams is good for sponsorship and fans and creating that excitement. And as you say, that must be exciting, I suppose, for the players. Although it was interesting when we had we're speaking last week. to Sally about Sally saying, who do you support? And she said, I don't really care about the pro teams. But for young players who maybe do care about the pro teams, that aspiration to kind of, I get to play for Edinburgh, I get to play for Glasgow Warriors. That's got to be huge, Johnny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've never been shy about this before. I won't be shy now. I want Glasgow to beat Edinburgh in this women's game on the 30th. We're going. I'll have my Glasgow kit on. I fully expect Glasgow to win. I think it's nice to kind of have a bit of that already. And I think the pro game probably I think is a little bit more popular among younger people. So hopefully girls that are coming through now will come through with an affinity to a pro team, with an ambition to play for either Glasgow or Edinburgh, and build a bit of the rivalry that there is already with the two pro men's teams. It would be nice for everyone to be able to feel that, I think.
Feel sad for the young people never to know that Edinburgh were once the Edinburgh Reavers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, ideally, there would be a Cali Reds women's team, but Glasgow will do.
Yeah, that's what's going to that's what's going to happen. We'll end up with 3 women's pro teams before we end up with 3 men's pro teams, just because the game's going so fast.
Can you imagine the fan base at that? Oh, that'd be beautiful. Make it so. So
the other big bit of news as we come, and we're come at the end of the main podcast, is Holly Davidson has been announced as a assistant referee. Is that what they call the assistant official? Touch
assistant
judge.
Referee, I think. Yeah.
Let's go back to touch judge. Touchy. For in the Six Nations, which, Craig, fantastic news. Long time coming, well deserved, but why is she not a referee? Why is she not fully officiating a match? There's no reason why she shouldn't be fully officiating one of these matches.
And also it's not like there's no gaps there, because you've no longer got Wayne Barnes, you've no longer got Tom Foley. So, is it Tom Foley? Yeah. So I just had Axel Foley in my head and Beverly Hill Cup. So for me, she's an established referee. She's a world-class referee, and everybody, probably 99.9% of the people who watch her refereeing a game go, "Oh, she's a pretty good referee," and she doesn't attract the same sort of derogatory comments that all referees kind of get, because she's very knowledgeable. She explains things very well, and leaves no one with any doubt of what she means and what she's and how she's officiating. So I guess it's just hierarchy. I don't know, but I'm really pleased for her, but I'm gutted. I would like to see her as
to be fair to them. I'd have to say what I think there probably is a protocol for how it happens. I don't think anyone gets to just be a referee in the Six Nations. As far as I can remember, everyone who referees has to be an assistant referee first, and you have to work your way through. So I think there's an element of it's probably fairer on her that she has to do it the same way as everyone else, which means she has to be an assistant first.
Yeah, but it's not a small game, John. It's England-Wales.
No, exactly. It's a bloody big game. So it's a huge step, and it does like I know what Johnny's saying. It's absolutely right that protocols are what they are in that sense. It does irk slightly that you go from refereeing the Women's World Cup final and refereeing it very, very well to, having to then kind of bide your time and, do your TMO stuff and do your assistant referee and stuff before you get a shot to actually referee at the top level of the men's game. But that's fine if that is the process. I'm sure she'll fly through it, and we'll see her officiating in the Six Nations very, very soon properly.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's testament to Holly Davidson that I had an Irish fan in our mentions saying what a fantastic job she did at refereeing a Leinster game, which you don't hear that. No. I know we're in a Be Kind era of referees, but still, you don't normally get that. No. Look, that's it for us for this week for the main podcast. We'll be back next week with probably a review of the European fixtures that are taking place this weekend. There are European fixtures this weekend.
Yes,
I've not
yes.
just seen that.
Yes,
There we are. We've got European rugby this weekend. So we'll be back with a review of that, catch up with some other bits and bobs of news. For the moment, though, it is goodbye from me, John, Johnny, and Craig.
Bye.
Bye. all.
Night out.